Spring 1945. A narrow German street still smells of smoke and wet stone. Roofs are broken open. Windows are boarded with scrap wood. Somewhere nearby, a church bell rings once, then falls silent. Children stand at the edge of the road. Thin coats, dusty shoes. They watch foreign soldiers approach. Their uniforms unfamiliar. Their language sharp and fast. These men are not retreating. They are not running. They are here to stay. One soldier stops. He kneels. From his pocket, he pulls out a small brown bar wrapped in paper. Chocolate. A luxury that has not existed here for years. He breaks it in half, then into smaller pieces. The children hesitate. So do the adults watching from doorways. This is the enemy, or at least, it was supposed to be in towns across defeated Germany. Moments like this begin to unfold quiet, human, and deeply unsettling for a population raised on years of fear and propaganda. To understand why something as simple as chocolate carried such shock, we must step back into the final, collapsing months of the Second World War. By early 1945, Nazi Germany was no longer a nation fighting for victory. It was a country collapsing under the weight of total war. Allied bombers had reduced major cities, Hamburg, Cologne, Dresden, to fields of rubble. Rail lines were twisted. Factories lay silent. Fuel was gone. Food was scarce. For German civilians, survival had become the central daily objective. Rations were thin and unreliable. Coffee was replaced with roasted barley. Meat had all but disappeared. Children grew up without sugar, sweets, or chocolate, once symbols of normal life. At the front, the Wehrmacht was breaking apart on the eastern side. The Red Army pushed relentlessly toward Berlin. In the west, American, British, Canadian, and French forces crossed the Rhine in March 1945. Town after town fell with little resistance. White flags appeared in windows, but fear did not disappear with surrender. Years of Nazi propaganda had warned civilians that Allied soldiers, especially Americans and British, would loot, abuse, and destroy German society. Posters, radio broadcasts, and school lessons repeated the message. The enemy was cruel, immoral, and vengeful. So, when Allied troops finally entered German towns, civilians braced for punishment. Parents hid daughters indoors. Elderly men stood stiffly at attention. Children were told not to speak. Yet the reality unfolding on the streets did not match the warnings they had been given. And that disconnect between expectation and experience would shape some of the most quietly powerful moments of the occupation weeks. The meaning of those moments becomes clearer when we look at who these Allied soldiers were and what orders they carried with them. The Allied soldiers entering Germany in 1945 who were not arriving blindly. They carried strict instructions. Looting was forbidden. Violence against civilians was punishable by court-martial. Discipline was to be visible, controlled, and deliberate. American and British commands understood something critical. The war was ending, but the peace had not yet begun. How German civilians experienced these first days of occupation would shape everything that followed: stability, cooperation, and reconstruction. Most Allied troops were young men in their late teens or early 20s. Many had crossed Europe, From Normandy through France and Belgium, they had seen death at close range. They had liberated concentration camps. They had lost friends. And yet, they were also carrying items that symbolized abundance: chewing gum, canned meat, cigarettes, and chocolate. For American soldiers especially, chocolate bars was standard issue. Hershey bars and D rations were designed to survive heat and rough handling. To the men carrying them, they were ordinary field rations. To German civilians, they were artifacts from another world. The first interactions were cautious. Soldiers posted signs in English and German. Curfews were enforced. But small gestures broke the tension. A piece of candy, a cigarette shared with an old man, a smile exchanged without words. Children were often the first bridge. They approached out of curiosity, not ideology, and soldiers responded instinctively. Chocolate was easy to give. It asked for nothing in return. These exchanges did not erase the past, but they introduced something unfamiliar into the ruins of defeat: humanity without immediate threat. From these small acts emerged several deeper dimensions of occupation, each revealing a different truth about war's end. For German civilians, the occupation was expected to be harsh. Years of air raids and propaganda had conditioned them to believe the victors would arrive with cruelty. Instead, many encountered restraint and gestures of unexpected kindness. Chocolate became the symbol of that shock. Children had not tasted it since before the war. Adults associated it with pre-war normalcy, a Germany that no longer existed. When Allied soldiers handed it out casually, it disrupted everything civilians thought they knew about the enemy. Mothers hesitated to let their children accept it. Some feared it was a trick. Others worried it would be taken away by authorities. But slowly, trust crept in, not through speeches, but through repeated moments that carried no violence. For Allied troops, these interactions were often spontaneous. Many had younger siblings back home. Some had children of their own they had not seen in years. Giving chocolate was not a political act. It was instinctive, a reminder that the war was ending, and that not everyone in Germany had been a soldier or a Nazi. In those moments, civilians were no longer targets or enemies. They were simply people emerging from ruins. These encounters did not erase trauma, but they softened the edge of victory. Together, these human exchanges opened the door to deeper questions about power, morality, and control in the occupied land. For 12 years, the Nazi regime had shaped how Germans viewed the outside world. Allied soldiers were portrayed as brutal occupiers, especially Americans, depicted as undisciplined and morally corrupt. This image was designed to sustain fear and loyalty, even as defeat became inevitable. But when those soldiers arrived and behaved differently, calm, organized, sometimes even kind, the propaganda collapsed in real time. Chocolate, gum, and shared cigarettes contradicted years of indoctrination. The regime's warnings suddenly felt hollow. This quiet realization was deeply unsettling. It forced civilians to confront the possibility that they had been lied to not once, but repeatedly. The Allied forces did not need generosity to assert control. They had tanks, rifles, and complete dominance. Yet restraint became a form of power. By showing discipline and measured humanity, occupying troops reduced resistance and chaos. Civilians complied not because they were terrified, but because the alternative seemed unnecessary. Chocolate, in this context, was not just kindness. It was symbolic proof that the war's brutality did not have to continue. As these early occupation weeks unfolded, one moment would crystallize this transformation when relief, defeat, and realization collided. April 1945. Germany is no longer a functioning state. Adolf Hitler remains in Berlin, surrounded by ruins and false reports. Allied forces move freely through the countryside. Resistance is scattered, often symbolic. In many towns, the first official occupation ceremonies are brief. A mayor is summoned. Weapons are surrendered. A flag is lowered. But the true turning point does not happen in offices or town halls. It happens on the streets. In one town after another, children begin waiting for Allied patrols. Not in fear, but in anticipation. They stand quietly near roads, holding out hands. Soldiers notice the pattern. Word spreads among units. This is the moment when the relationship shifts. Civilians are no longer bracing for punishment. They are adjusting to a new reality. One where the enemy does not shout orders constantly. One where guns remain slung instead of raised. For many soldiers, this realization carries weight. They are standing in the heart of a nation that had nearly destroyed Europe. And yet, the faces in front of them are not ideological symbols. They are hungry, exhausted, human. The war, in its violent form, is ending. But its moral reckoning is just beginning. That reckoning would soon be reinforced by what civilians would see and learn in the days that followed. As Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany, occupation realities hardened alongside these human moments. Posters appeared detailing new rules. Radios were confiscated. Nazi symbols were torn down. Curfews were enforced with quiet efficiency. Then came the discoveries. Civilians were shown nearby concentration camps. Some were ordered to walk through them, to see, to smell, to understand. For many Germans, this was the true turning point. The chocolate shared weeks earlier now existed alongside undeniable evidence of atrocity. Kindness from Allied soldiers did not erase guilt, but it made denial impossible. The soldiers themselves were changed. Many who had offered small comforts now stood guard over sites of mass death. Their role shifted from fighters to witnesses and enforcers of accountability. In this contrast between generosity and horror, the occupation revealed its full complexity. Victory was not clean. Humanity did not cancel responsibility. These moments marked the end of illusion and the beginning of a long, uneasy aftermath that would reshape Germany for decades. By the summer of 1945, Germany was a defeated and occupied nation. Its cities lay in ruins. Its government had ceased to exist. Millions of civilians were displaced, hungry, and uncertain about the future. The initial weeks of occupation, marked by small, human interactions, gave way to structured control. Allied military governments took over food distribution, housing, and law enforcement. Ration systems were revised. Black markets emerged. Survival remained difficult. Yet the tone set during those early encounters mattered. German civilians, having expected brutality, instead experienced order and restraint. This contrast reduced panic and limited widespread unrest in many areas. Cooperation replaced resistance. For children who had received chocolate from foreign soldiers, the memory lingered. It became one of the first personal experiences of a world beyond Nazi ideology. Something ordinary, shared without demand. These memories did not absolve Germany's past, but they softened the transition from total war to enforced peace, a fragile bridge toward reconstruction. That bridge would soon carry the weight of justice, accountability, and historical reckoning. As occupation settled into routine, the Allies shifted focus from control to transformation. Denazification programs removed former party officials from public roles. Schools reopened with rewritten curricula. Newspapers were relaunched under supervision. Germany was not just being governed, it was being re-educated for many civilians. The contrast between Nazi warnings and lived experience never fully faded. The memory of Allied soldiers sharing food stood alongside the shock of revealed crimes. Together, they reshaped how authority, truth, and morality were understood. Veterans on both sides would later recall these weeks as strangely quiet. The guns were silent, but the weight of what had happened pressed heavily on everyone. Soldiers returned home carrying images not just of battle but of children in ruins, holding chocolate with disbelief. These occupation weeks did not erase suffering, but they marked a moment when war's cruelty briefly gave way to human connection before history moved on to rebuilding and division. And from that fragile pause emerges the final question: what did these moments truly mean? Beyond symbolism and memory, the end of war is rarely defined by a single moment. It arrives in fragments, in silence after explosions, in rules posted on walls, in small acts that feel almost out of place amid destruction. In occupied Germany, chocolate became one of those fragments, not because it erased guilt or suffering, but because it revealed something essential about power and humanity. Victory did not have to mean endless cruelty. Control did not require humiliation. For German civilians, these encounters cracked the narrative they had been fed for years. The enemy did not always arrive as a monster. Sometimes he arrived as a tired young man with a ration bar and a choice. For Allied soldiers, these moments reminded them what the war was supposed to end: not just territory or regimes, but the conditions that made normal life impossible. History often remembers battles and leaders, but the shape of peace is formed in quieter spaces on ruined streets, between strangers. In the pause before a child accepts chocolate from a former enemy, and in those pauses, the true cost and fragile hope of the post-war world is revealed.